We had an exclusive first look on last week's program and a new book that has landed with quite an impact. Justice on Trial, the Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Supreme Court quickly shot up to #1 on Amazon. Molly Hemingway is back. She's the co-author along with Carrie Severino of the Judicial Crisis Network, which lobbied for Kavanaugh's nomination. And Molly, you report that the Trump team held back derogatory information on Christine Blasey Ford because the White House felt that any criticism of Ford would be treated as a smear and depicted as victim shaming. My question, isn't that true? And isn't it the rationale that women who are victims of sexual assault or believe they are would be more reluctant to come forward if they believe their past will be picked apart?
Yeah, these are legitimate questions, and that was part of why the not just the White House, but also Senate Republicans had this information. They both had ways of people calling in, and they were getting quite a bit of information of how Christine Blasey Ford, that what people were saying to these people, what people were saying to these investigators, was very much at odds with that media presentation. So I do think it's important to be careful. It's also important for the media to be careful in how they are telling a story and making sure that they are not being one-sided, that they're not leaving out information, or they're not becoming champions for one side or the other.
You and your co-author spoke to people who said that Christine Ford, back in high school, remember this is all decades ago, was a heavy drinker, who was much more aggressive with boys than we were led to believe. Did you have any reluctance about publishing that information now?
Well, we actually had so much more stuff. We spoke with quite a few people who knew Christine Blasey Ford in high school or knew Brett Kavanaugh in high school, and they had incredibly salacious stories. We felt that in order to tell the specifics of some of those stories, we needed them to put names with it, and when people were
they were not on the record?
People were understandably worried about having their name associated with it because they would say, well, I'm trying to get my kid into school, and if it comes out and the media go after me, I'm scared to do it. So we had those stories. We had a lot of those stories. We felt we needed to pull back on that while also being accurate in describing what her friends say and what they have said. And these are people who don't have necessarily completely negative views of Christine Blasey Ford. They also liked her. They thought she was nice. They just say there was this other aspect, and that the way that the media were portraying it was completely at odds. And they also say that they had talked to some reporters here in town and that this was not completely not well known, but that when they would tell stories, they weren't pursued as aggressively as any anti-Kavanaugh stories.
Right. Well, maybe they also had the problem that you wrestled with, which is about getting people to go on the record. You accuse the media of having an irrational personal dislike of Brett Kavanaugh at that time, despite the fact that he seems like a genial guy who, allegations aside, coaches his girls' basketball team. Why do you think that would have been?
I'm not entirely sure why that was, but just looking at how they handled different stories, or even how at some point in the process you start seeing the media suggesting, it goes from him being a gang rapist. You see in USA Today they're running a story saying he shouldn't be around children as a coach.
Yeah, let me quote that. This is one some I had missed. Eric Brady, writing in USA Today, that Kavanaugh should give up his school coaching duties. This is during the fight, because he credibly accused sex offenders should stay off basketball courts for now when kids are around. Did the press call foul on that kind of personal invective?
And in fact, they did pull back on some of that, but just overarching, the story was one where any allegation against Brett Kavanaugh, it seemed, no matter how thinly sourced, would be getting full treatment. You note how you want to be careful about victims.
Yeah.
That's true. Reputation is also an issue, and you want to be careful about defaming someone or going after their reputation without the goods.
I mean, people forget he threw ice in a bar once. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but that became the day's top headline. Julie Swetnick, one of the accusers, represented by Michael Avenatti, now has some other legal problems, claimed to have been raped at 10 house parties. She said there were gang rapes attended by Kavanaugh and others. She also said that Kavanaugh, her friend, spiked the punch at some of these parties. Then she was interviewed by NBC. What happened?
Well, NBC found that she was not such a credible witness. But even more than that, NBC actually knew that the supposed witness to corroborate her allegations had denied what Michael Avenatti had claimed about her statement.
Let's just slow down. So Avenatti said, hey, here's somebody else who's a friend of Julie Swetnick who can vouch for what she's saying.
Right.
And then what happened?
They talked to her. She said, actually, what he is telling you is not what I said. She was very upset. They sat on that for weeks. They had the information before his confirmation vote. They didn't reveal it until weeks after. And this is, there are so many different ways the media can not do their jobs well, and omitting information or sitting on information is one of them. Or even how, I was struck by how, we tell the story in the book of how when Christine Blasey Ford says she has 4 witnesses to support her account, and all 4 say that they don't support her, including one who's a very close friend. And when that comes out that the friend says, I cannot corroborate this allegation, the people close to the Kavanaughs think, this is it. Finally, the media coverage will change. And the media barely noted that Leland Kaiser was not backing up her friend.
But wasn't there some coverage of the other side, some coverage when the questions raised about whether it's Blasey Ford or Swetnick, some coverage when some of the allegations against Kavanaugh were not corroborated?
There was always some coverage, but it's just about the deluge on one side versus a little pittance on the other. And so we need to be, there are so many different ways that we need to be careful with our coverage, including the amount of attention we give to one claim or another.
All right, Molly Hemingway, Justice on Trial. Congratulations on the book's success.
Thank you.
Great to see you as always.